It has been a deadly Christmas in Iraq for Christians who are increasingly being targeted throughout the Middle East. In Baghdad, 3 car bombs killed dozens of people. One blast targeted a church during Christmas Mass, hitting worshippers as they were leaving. At least 26 are dead. Another blast ripped through a market in a Christian neighborhood and killed 11. Tragically, these are not isolated attacks. The ancient Christian community now a frequent target of al-Qaeda and other militants. In fact, the U.S. State Department today condemned what it calls years of deliberate and senseless terrorist targeting of Iraqi Christians. Chris Mitchell is the Jerusalem bureau chief for the Christian Broadcast Network. Chris, nice to see you from Jerusalem. Is it specifically in Iraq and Syria? It seems as though that Christians around the Middle East are also under threat as well.
They are. It's not a very Merry Christmas for millions of Christians here in the Middle East, Leland. You know, you could say that to describe it what it's like for Christians in the United States or just anybody around the world, if you wore a Santa hat, you could be killed. If you put up Christmas decorations, you know, you could be subject to an attack. Or if you were waiting in line for midnight mass, you're really putting your life in the line. And these are things that we take for granted in the West. But in the Middle East right now, this is a very dangerous time, evidenced by those attacks today. And what it is, Leland, is many times a systematic attempt by radical Islam, whether it's al-Qaeda in Iraq, whether it's al-Nusra in Syria, or the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, to eradicate Christians from the very cradle of Christianity.
You talk about that. Obviously, Syria is a complete mess. Iraq has its own sectarian violence problems. But you think about Egypt. There is a military there. There is a lot of U.S. money there. $3 billion or so in U.S. military aid goes there depending on the year. Are these governments doing anything or doing what they can to protect the Christians, or are folks out left on their own?
Many times they're left on their own, Leland. That's certainly the case in Iraq. I mean, there's been so many bus bombings there in Iraq. There's been beheadings in Syria, as you said, which is a complete mess. In Egypt, there's been a lot of church burnings. And although the government has changed, it's much better than the Muslim Brotherhood government that was overthrown last summer. There's still a lot of danger for Christians in Egypt, particularly. I was down there just a few days after there were several, maybe dozens of churches that were bombed in Minya, and we saw devastation on a scale that hadn't been seen, some say, in almost 7 centuries in Egypt.
From your reporting, as you've traveled throughout the Middle East, do you get a sense that Christians are finally saying enough's enough, it's not worth staying here, we're going to take our family and leave? Or are folks either staying because they don't have a choice or because of their own religion?
I think many times they're leaving because they feel they're a threat for their lives. The Archbishop of Baghdad just said a few days ago that this is a mortal exodus. And what he meant by that is the number of Christians that have fled the Middle East in the past 10 years or so is staggering. The United Nations estimates that about 850,000 Christians from Iraq have fled, that about 450,000 from Syria have fled in just the past 2 years alone. Let me give you one example of what it's like for an Iraqi Christian just a few years ago. Several men came into his store and they gave him 3 options. The first option was convert to Islam. The second option was pay a $70,000 tax. The third option is if you don't do the first 2, we'll kill you and your family. And so he took a 4th option, which thousands of Christians have already done, is they've fled their country. So that's what Christians are facing here in the Middle East.
Chris Mitchell, live from our Jerusalem bureau. You know, there is an Arabic saying that goes something along the lines of this: I have 2 choices, both of which are bitter, which is really what Christians there in the Middle East are facing right now. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Merry Christmas there, as it is nightfall in Jerusalem. Jamie?